Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave, on behalf of every father and every mother who waits for freedom, on behalf of our warriors, and paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have an excellent broadcast for you today, so thanks for tuning in, guys. If you could, please do hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps us out, helps spread the word. You can also check us out on social media on Twitter and BlueSky. We post some updates and stuff there. We have our colleague Daniele on today, who is going to be presenting an article that he published on our website, Tochnyi.info. So do check out Tochnyi.info. That's where a lot of our contributors publish articles and other stuff, and we try to get them on the stream when we can to talk to you guys. So it's great that we've got him here today. Chat, of course, if you have any questions, especially for the author, then please do post them in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them in the Q&A towards the end. First I'll present the news. That'll be followed by a report from Mr. German Aid to Ukraine. Then Stanimir will present his segment on the Russian economy, and then we'll speak with Daniele about his new article. And then after that, we'll do Q&A. So good to see everybody, and I'll present the news.
These are the main headlines as of June 28th, 2026. First up, we have operations. Ukrainian missiles struck the Voronezh semiconductor device plant, a Russian facility tied to the production of components used in military equipment. The Exile Nova Plus analytical group released a video showing damage at the site after the strike. Early information indicates that several Storm Shadow cruise missiles may have been involved. The plant is part of Russia's defense production network and makes electronic parts used in multiple weapon systems. Its components have been linked to the Pantsir surface-to-air missile and gun system, the Kh-101 cruise missile, and missiles used with the Iskander-K system. For the Kh-101 production chain, the Voronezh plant supplies electronic elements such as transistor assemblies and semiconductor matrices. These parts are used in the UVK-208 unit, which is integrated into the missile's onboard systems. The facility was also involved in the production network for the 9M727 cruise missile, which is used in the Iskander-K. In that role, it produced and supplied semiconductor matrices for the Zarya 61M onboard digital computer. The plant also manufactures electronic components for the 7.2V6 combat vehicle used in the Pantsir S1 system and related versions. These include diodes and transistor assemblies for the TVK2 television guidance channel. Ukrainian drones struck oil refineries in Ufa, a city in Russia's Bashkortostan region. Videos shared by Exile Nova Plus showed the attacks as they were filmed by people in the area. Initial information indicates that 2 of Upa's 3 oil refineries were hit. Local residents also filmed drones passing over the city before the strikes. The aircraft in the footage appeared similar to Ukraine's long-range Lu-2 drones. The drones are believed to have flown roughly 1,400 kilometers before reaching the area. Local officials have not yet reported the extent of damage or how the attack affected the refinery's operations. Ukrainian Special Operations Forces, working with underground operatives from the resistance movement, destroyed a railroad bridge in occupied Crimea. The bridge was near the village of Rozdolne and crossed the North Crimean Canal. The operation began on the night of June 22nd when Ukrainian forces used medium-range strike drones to hit the bridge. The drones carried out several attacks on the structure, causing serious damage to the railroad tracks and stopping train movement along the section. The strike also brought down one of the bridge's large spans. Afterward, underground Ukrainian operatives observed specialized railway repair equipment arriving at the site as Russian forces attempted to restore the route. Once the information was confirmed, Special Operations Forces moved into the second stage of the mission. On the night of June 23rd, drones attacked the railway site near Rozdolne again. This time, the drones hit both the newly arrived repair equipment and what remained of the damaged bridge. The second strike prevented Russian forces from quickly restoring the railway connection. Russian command had been using that railway line to move supplies and personnel quickly, making it an important logistics route in occupied Crimea. Up next, we have economy and aid. The UK Foreign Secretary announced a new support package for Ukraine worth almost 290 million euros, or about $381.5 million, focused on reconstruction and energy security. The announcement was made at the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Gdansk. The Foreign Secretary said Britain's support for Ukraine extends beyond the current war and includes helping the country rebuild for the future. She said Ukraine's security is directly connected to the UK's security and that supporting Kyiv now will help build a strong long-term partner for London. The Deputy Prime Minister said a lasting peace in Ukraine will require more than military assistance. He said partner countries also need to help rebuild communities, strengthen institutions, attract investment, and support Ukraine's recovery. A major part of the package is a €210 million agreement with UK-based Lysenko to provide nuclear fuel to Ukraine's nuclear energy company Energoatom. The deal is intended to strengthen Ukraine's energy system, help it withstand Russian strikes on critical infrastructure, and support a stable electricity supply. The package also includes funding to modernize Ukraine's justice system. The planned measures are meant to improve accountability for serious wartime crimes, speed up court procedures, and reduce corruption by making the system more transparent and fair. In addition, British international investment will provide up to $65 million for renewable energy projects and Ukraine's banking sector, working with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The funding will support 2 new wind power plants and help finance Ukrainian businesses through the Bank of Lviv. British companies are also expected to take part in future reconstruction projects. The Ukrainian president thanked the United Kingdom for the uranium supply package for Ukraine's energy sector and also for previously introducing new sanctions against Russia. The Council of the European Union has extended its restrictive measures against Russia for another 12 months. The measures will now remain in place until July 31, 2027. The decision followed the European Council meeting held on June 19th, where EU leaders agreed to keep economic sanctions on Russia in force for an additional year. The restrictions were first introduced in 2014 and were expanded substantially after February of 2022 following the full-scale invasion. The current EU measures cover several major sectors of the Russian economy, including trade, finance, energy, and dual-use technology. They include a ban on transferring Russian seaborne crude oil and certain petroleum products into the EU. The sanctions also prohibit transactions with several Russian financial institutions, as well as crypto service providers in Russia and in third countries. The EU also suspended the broadcasting activities and licenses of several Kremlin-backed media outlets accused of spreading disinformation inside the EU. The measures also include tools designed to help the EU respond to attempts to bypass the sanctions and prevent restricted goods, services, or financial activity from being rerouted through other channels. The French Navy intercepted a vessel linked to Russia's Shadow Fleet after it failed a nationality inspection in the Mediterranean Sea on June 23rd. The French government announced the operation on the 25th. It was the second such interception carried out by France in under a month. European countries have been placing sanctions on vessels suspected of helping Russia bypass restrictions on oil and gas exports, and they are increasingly boarding and stopping the ships directly as part of efforts to enforce the sanctions. French officials said the cargo tanker Deliver had been traveling from Primorsk on Russia's Baltic Sea coast when it was stopped near Sicily. The ship was sailing under a Cameroonian flag, but French authorities suspect the flag may not have been legitimate. After a French boarding team inspected the vessel, the ship's documents reinforced concerns about whether it was properly registered under the flag it was using. The vessel has been moved to an anchorage for further inspections. Up next, we have international relations. The commander of Ukraine's 425th Separate Assault Regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Yuri Harkavy, has been suspended while investigators examine claims that soldiers' rights were violated inside the unit. The regiment's press officer confirmed the suspension on June 25th. The unit is widely known as Skelia and has reportedly seen battlefield losses above the average for Ukrainian formations. It came under new scrutiny after a June 23rd investigation by Babel described the alleged mistreatment inside the regiment. The report outlined 26 fatal incidents among recruits that were not connected to direct combat. One day after the investigation was released, Ukraine's State Bureau of Investigation opened a pretrial case involving the Skelia Regiment. The agency said it was checking the claims raised in the report and reviewing whether military officials had gone beyond their authority during martial law in ways that caused serious harm. No findings have yet been released. Skelia is one of Ukraine's largest assault formations, with more than 10,000 service members. It was expanded as part of the Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrskyi's effort to develop specialized assault units. The regiment receives many newly mobilized recruits and is often assigned to especially dangerous assault missions. Relatives and former soldiers of the unit allege that the regiment has problems with poor medical care, coercive practices, and physical mistreatment. The report was based on accounts from current and former soldiers, relatives of mobilized troops, and documents including medical records, court materials, and forensic findings. Russia and Ukraine carried out a new prisoner exchange on Friday, with each side returning 160 captured service members. The Ukrainian president announced the return on social media, saying Ukraine was continuing to bring its citizens back from Russian captivity. He said that 160 Ukrainian service members had been released and that all of them had been held since 2022. Russia's defense ministry also confirmed that 160 Russian service members had been returned. And last item this week, I told you I'd keep you guys updated. Repeaters used by the Russian military to control strike drones during attacks on Ukraine have stopped operating in Belarus, according to the Ukrainian president. The president said that as of June 22nd, the systems were no longer active on Belarusian territory. He added that Ukraine still does not know whether the equipment has been fully dismantled or whether it has only been taken out of operation. He said the relevant Ukrainian agencies are continuing to verify the situation and determine what has happened to the systems. On June 19th, the Ukrainian president said that if Belarus genuinely did not want to be involved in the war, it needs to remove these repeaters. He warned that if Belarus did not do so, Ukraine would take action itself. He also said that when the Belarusian leader claimed he did not want to be pulled into the war, he should be honest with his own public. The Ukrainian president argued the issue was not only whether the Belarusian leader personally became involved, but whether Russia could drag the entire country into the invasion. Ukraine gave Belarus 1 week and said that would be enough time for Belarusian authorities to remove the equipment if they truly wanted to avoid taking part in the war against Ukraine. Russia's use of Belarusian territory to help control Shahed-type attack drones during attacks on Ukraine first became public in January of 2026. In February, the international intelligence community Inform Napalm and the analytical cyber center Phoenix gained access to accounts used by Russian military personnel. They also obtained data from monitoring systems used by drone operators. By March 2026, 4 such stations had been identified in Belarus. Information was also obtained about Russian plans to place additional equipment there. So it looks like Lukashenko backed down or stood up to Putin, however you want to look at it, I guess, although we need to wait for further confirmation that the equipment was actually dismantled and removed and they don't just switch it back on. And that's it for the main headlines this week. We will now move to the next segment.
Yeah, and the next segment, that would be me. Hello, guys. As always, I will now present this week's most important news from Germany regarding Ukraine from the past weeks, and I hope everything is fine. I'm on a different setup, like kind of makeshift setup right now, so I hope everything is fine, everything is working, and yeah, just let me know if something is not working. We are starting with very important military aid news. Germany is funding a multi-year satellite imagery contract between Ukraine and the German subsidiary of Planet Labs worth 240 million euros. The contract itself was already announced in July 2025. However, Ukraine was not mentioned as beneficiary. However, in early June 2026, I searched through some parliamentary documents and by pure chance found proof that Germany is actually funding this contract for Ukraine, which is why I reported on it on the 9th of June. Next up is news from the 11th of June, when I reported that the German government has financed another humanitarian aid shipment for Mykolaiv, consisting of battery systems and inverters, which have been handed over to city halls used by internally displaced Ukrainians. On the 18th of June, Germany's Minister of Defense Boris Pistorius announced that Germany would invest another $200 million in the Pearl program to fund US-made armaments for Ukraine, mostly air defense-related equipment, as well as an additional $200 million US dollars in the Jumpstart program to finance PAC-3 missiles for Ukraine's Patriot fire units specifically. On the same day, I reported that Germany's Federal Agency for Technical Relief, THW, has delivered multiple specialized vehicles to the Kyiv region to support routine maintenance, emergency response, and infrastructure restoration. An aerial lift truck was handed over, which will be used by a utility company of the Lozova community, while the Kupiansk community received 2 MAN manipulators with enhanced off-road capabilities. While it is not mentioned by my Ukrainian source, Ole Syniehobov, sorry, I'm very bad with Ukrainian names, as everybody knows, head of the Kharkiv Regional State Administration, it appears from the footage that the EU has co-funded the procurement of these vehicles, or the shipment, or both. On the same day and a day later, it was announced that Germany would finance and deliver 2,000 Ukrainian-designed Termit UGVs made in Germany by the German-Ukrainian joint venture Quantum 10 Core Industries, which was announced a few months back. Boris Pistorius, our Minister of Defense, also announced on the 18th of June that Germany will supply a 3-digit number of not closer described air-to-air missiles to Ukraine from its own army stocks. On the 22nd of June, I reported that the German city of Bremen, together with the Stiftung Solidarität Ukraine Foundation and the German Society for International Cooperation and another partner, has supported the rehabilitation care in the Odessa region. Adjustable medical beds, furniture, and modern rehabilitation equipment has recently been handed over to the Odessa Regional Clinical Hospital and the Odessa Regional Medical and Physical Therapy Center. On the same day, I also reported that Germany's Federal Agency for Technical Relief, THW, has delivered 8 vehicles to the Kherson Oblast to support utility and emergency services in the region. Another 4 vehicles will be handed over in the likely near future. And last but not least, and I don't have an image for that, Germany's Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy announced on the 25th of June that as part of its Ukraine assistance, it would invest another 38 million euros into Ukraine Connect and another 45 million euros into Ramp Up. Ukraine Connect is a financial instrument through which German and European companies can obtain attractive, low-interest loans to finance their projects in Ukraine, while Ramp Up is a newly established guarantee fund set up by the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development to encourage investments in decentralized energy generation in Ukraine. And that's it for my segment. So back to you, Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Germinated to Ukraine, for your update. And now we're going to talk to Stanimir a little bit. So, Stanimir, I just wanted to do like a quick vibe check on the current media coverage of the fuel crisis in Russia, because that's pretty much like, at least on my like news feeds and social media feeds, like what everyone's talking about in terms of like Russian news. I would say that the story has now like migrated over into the global media, and they're now covering it in detail. And I just wanted to like look at kind of some of the stories and what they're covering and how they're covering it, and maybe we can get like a general idea of how accurate it is, or maybe what parts of the picture they're missing. So the first article is a Deutsche Welle article. It's written by a guy named Oleg Loganov. But from what I can tell, he is a Russian economist, and it even says at the bottom that the article was written in Russian. But I would say, like, he has a lot of his factual information really well researched. But I just think his conclusion is like a little bit like hedging, I guess I could say. So his conclusion, I'll just read it because it's pretty short. Fuel prices are expected to rise as they did last year, but not sharply, as retail gasoline prices in Russia are strictly regulated by the state. Some independent filling stations and smaller chains might temporarily close to avoid losses. Drone strikes are causing significant costs for the oil sector. They disrupt operations and create logistical bottlenecks. The impact on the Russian state will remain limited. Oil that can't be processed domestically is being exported. As long as the war in the Middle East continues to destabilize global markets, conditions remain favorable for export. And Ukraine is currently targeting Russia's export infrastructure, but so far the attacks haven't had a significant operational impact, as oil exports have still been reaching high levels. So yeah, I think there's some parts of that I would like agree with, and some parts based on like Stanimir's analysis we might disagree with. So Stanimir, what do you think of that kind of general conclusion?
So first I'll tackle the thing with prices. At independent gas station, prices started probably 10 to 15 rubles above what is being given out at big chains. So we're talking something like 80, 85 rubles starting price. And the normal right now is something like 100 rubles per liter of gasoline at these independent gas stations. And so fuel prices in Russia are not quite regulated. They have a free market to an extent when it comes to fuel. What is being done is that the Russian government offers Russian refining companies the difference between the price at which they sell fuel domestically and the price at which they can sell the fuel on the export market, and pays them back that as subsidies that are called the Dämpfer. So that's how prices are being regulated. But right now, when you are an independent gas station chain and you go to a depot that is run by a big refinery, the price you're not getting what is being reported in on Spimex, the commodities exchange, which is 80,000 rubles per ton, you're getting double that. The prices I've seen is 160,000 rubles, and that's without transportation. That's from this week, from yesterday, I think. And when the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service comes to you as an independent gas station and asks you, why are you saying fuel at this price? You just give them the invoice. This is what the price that the refinery asked of me, so I can't sell at a lower price, and they just get okay and go up the chain. So prices have gone up by 20, 30, in some places 100 rubles. The highest price for diesel I've seen is 200 rubles per liter. That's insane. So to say that prices may go up a little, no, prices have gone up a lot. 60% of Russia's gas station chains are independent, and they serve around 40% of Russia's population, which is not a trivial amount. And in some places, you could drive for 500, 600 kilometers and not see a gas station chain, a gas station from the major gas station chains that have their own refineries. So for those people, the price increases are real. And also, if you can't find the time to wait at the queue at the gas station from one of the big chains that still has gasoline, you're going to probably buy gasoline quickly at some other place. And those places are independent gas stations that manage to get some fuel and are selling it at over 100 rubles per liter. That's beyond the means of most Russians. So I completely disagree that prices have gone up a little. And even if you look at official data from Rostat, I think over the last 2 weeks, gasoline prices have gone up by 5%. That's in the span of 14 days or 10 working days. That's still a huge increase for Russia. The other thing that I have to point out is that the prices, even at the big chains, are going up slowly by something like 1 or 2 rubles per week, sometimes 3 or 4. But also, I've seen Tatneft and Bashneft and also Gazpromneft prices that are actually closer to the prices of the independent gas station chains. So we're talking 100 rubles per liter, 85, 90 rubles per liter. And the final thing I want to add is that you can't just rely on these big chains because, for example, in the city of Murmansk, as of today, Rosneft, which is Russia's largest chain, isn't selling gasoline. None of their gas stations are.
Yeah, so I think I would describe this article as someone who has a good grasp of the facts, but they're either kind of trying to downplay the extent of what's going on, or they're refusing to allow their analysis to reach some logical, darker conclusions, I guess you might say. So yeah, I don't know a lot of details about the author, but I read another article by him about like the Russian kind of internet situation. And I think I got a lot of the same vibe, which sounds like kind of the vibe of a lot of Russian economy stuff, which Stanimir talks about with me, which is like they are being very like scientifically minded about like the cause and effect of what's going on economically, but they're kind of careful to not say things conclusively to avoid, political backlash. So that's the kind of vibe I get from this. I'm not sure how this guy got published in Deutsche Welle, but I thought it was like a reasonably good article on the facts, but he's like kind of stopping short of, I think, coming up with any real conclusions that kind of matter. The next article is more of a like generalist article. It's in the Independent. I picked like free articles, by the way, which we'll get to towards the end. So you guys can look at all these if you want. But Ukraine's audacious drone campaign sparked a fuel crisis. A lot of the beginning of it just covers like the details of the drone campaign itself. I found all that to be pretty good. But then we finally get to like the conclusion, which I'll just read here, which is indirectly, businesses in Russia also suffer under the weight of higher energy prices, with prices passed on to consumers. Gasoline in Russia is around 65 cents per liter before the invasion, now costs 95 cents as of May. Inflation officially is at 5.6%. In recent weeks, restrictions on buying gasoline have been imposed in the central region, blamed on temporary logistical difficulties. Similar issues are reported in other regions. In Omsk, which only recently celebrated the lowest fuel prices in Siberia, residents were concerned about shortages. and a ban on filling containers came late on Monday. And then they, talk about some anecdotal stuff from Russians saying, there's no gas. So I think that's kind of like it's not that they're familiar with the facts and they're downplaying them. It's more just that like they're like 2 weeks behind. They're not reading the local media stories the way Stanimir does. And that seems to be the general rule, is like generally media like this is about 2 weeks behind what Stanimir's tracking in local media reports. So Stanimir, what do you think? Is there anything in this article worth commenting on?
Well, I would have to say that the fuel crisis has been started not just 3,500 kilometers from behind enemy lines. There's also a fuel crisis 4,500 kilometers from enemy lines and 5,000 kilometers from enemy lines. The regions of Irkutsk and Zabaikalsky Krai have declared both a heightened state of alert. The next stage will be to declare an emergency. And
these are the main headlines as of June 28th.
The businesses have been impacted all over Russia. I think I have in the later reporting several regions with problems, but just to quickly say it, they've stopped garbage collection in certain parts. Hospitals have not been able to find someone to fulfill their tenders for fuel. Prisons have had issues. Schools, municipalities, intercity buses are affected in multiple regions. I have two as an example, but I think the number of regions are 8, and they're drastically increasing prices because of the problem with fuel. And diesel is also becoming a big problem in the eastern parts and also in some of the western parts that were first affected, like Ryazan. Basically, companies cannot find diesel, which means buses won't be running.
Yeah, and then I think there's like a story from the Japan Times. This one was published today, so I think it's pretty up to date, but they're still like a little behind on their information. And then the Japan Times published one about 4 days ago. We can skip that one though, but it's sort of the same idea. They're just a bit like behind on the conclusions. They're like, the price of gas went up 6%, and it's like, yeah, you can read that in an official newspaper, but it sounds like the Japan Times really needs someone reading more local media reports in detail. But it is what it is. I'm not expecting the best like Russian energy coverage from the Japan Times. But I just want to like stress, this is probably what most people are reading when they're hearing about this fuel crisis stuff. So, and then the last one I wanted to bring up was it's in oilprice.com. So I would assume it's some kind of a trade website. It was actually published by EurasiaNet, but these are the oil guys posting articles about oil. And I just thought one thing that was kind of interesting is that they published this article on EurasiaNet about how Russia is now going to Kazakhstan for gasoline. And this has been, I think, covered reasonably well by the media, that like Russia, and for obvious reasons, like it's understandable why. It's crazy that Russia would go to a country like Kazakhstan and ask for gasoline, a country like Russia, right, that is widely known to be a gas station with nukes. So that's part's not like the interesting part, though, in my opinion, although I understand why it's being repeated. The thing is that they're asking Russia's asking Kazakhstan for 50,000 tons of gasoline. And Stanimir pointed out to me that's maybe half a day of what like Russia gasoline consumption. Is that accurate, Stanimir?
Yeah, for the summer it's below half a day, 45% of a daily use.
Yeah, so I don't know. Like you'd think that a trade publication would be more savvy with details, but I guess they're just repeating what EurasiaNet publishes. But anyway, like I guess that's the point. Is there's like really there doesn't seem to be a broad understanding or reporting of the scale of the current fuel crisis in Russia, which is, I think, pretty bad if you are looking at local media reports. So I think that's like pretty much all I wanted to cover about it. It's great that it's getting as much attention as it is, but I do want to stress that like I think Stanimir's coverage of this is probably the best that's freely available on the internet. He does a really good job. He follows all the local media reports, and that's really important in this time when the broader media reports, as you kind of just saw, are maybe a little bit less, they're a little bit fuzzier on the details, and that can lead to some different conclusions, or some other people are motivated for different reasons. And the only other thing I wanted to mention is, and I think Stanimir kind of agrees, that Reuters generally has pretty good coverage. Their articles are usually pretty good. They clearly follow local media reports in their reporting. They quote ministers correctly and, like draw the right conclusions from which ministers said what. It's pretty clear they have an understanding of the Russian system a lot better than, a publication that doesn't invest in that skill set. But the issue is they're behind a paywall, so not a lot of people read what Reuters is publishing directly. They might get it secondhand from other sources. Stanimir, anything to say about that?
And they also have sources within probably the Russian Ministry of Energy and in the Russian oil sector in general. So they have good coverage because of that. And I have to say, we're not paid by Reuters, but they do really good reporting when it comes to scoops for the Russian energy sector.
Yeah, to be clear, we're not paid by Reuters. I actually don't subscribe to Reuters. I hear everything that they publish secondhand, but generally, when I am able to sneak an article in somehow, their coverage is very good. So high praises for their reporting, and which in this day and age is quite rare, and it's pretty rare we have good things to say about media publications. So credit where it's due. Okay, Stanimir. So that's just the little segment I had for you this week, and now we can move to your general report on the Russian economy.
Yeah, and first we can start with the map that I do, so you can see the scale of how far the shortage has been propagated. So we're down to, I think, only 10 regions out of the 83 don't have shortages. These are Chechnya, the Republic of Adygea, the Komi Republic, the Donetsk Autonomous Region, the Republic of Yakutia, and Chukotka, Kamchatka, the Jewish Autonomous Region, and Altai, the Republic of Altai. And so I have to point out that Chechnya will probably never report shortages because of the clampdown by Ramzan Kadyrov. Komi has restrictions, Yakutia has restrictions, Kamchatka has restrictions, but it has fuel for at least 2 months left. And the Republic of Altai also has restrictions, and Adygea is smack dab in the middle of Krasnodar Krai. So we should get it eventually as the shortage spreads through Krasnodar Krai. So over the next 2 weeks, I expect that the map will be as red as it can get, and we'll have only 4 regions that are not red. So it's spreading much faster than before, and it's coming with a lot more consequences than before. Now, to go back to my general reporting, we'll go back to the tanker first, the tanker traffic data, and then we'll resume the fuel news as we have a summary on that. So yeah, for Ust-Luga, for this week, we had a few adjustments. So the adjustments for the oil exports were down to 1.15 million barrels a day. That is a bit high for the port. It's usually at 0.7, 0.8, 0.9. But again, there's a caveat that our numbers are inflated by 10, 15%. For the oil products, the adjustment was substantial. It's down to just 0.05 million barrels a day. That's that's low for this port, extremely low actually. And for this week, we have again a high initial number of 1.77 million barrels a day. That's high for the port, but you see a lot of these are partly laden, and one was split loaded between Primorsk and Ust-Luga. I kept it in Ust-Luga, so that was the later port. And when it comes to oil products, there are, again, mostly partially laden. 2 have actually gone underway. Currently, it's at 0.3 million barrels a day. That's a bit low from normal, but I expect that if those 2 partly laden ones, the 2 tankers that are partly laden actually don't sail this week, we are going to see an adjustment down to a low value for this port. And this is something we're seeing this week a lot. The fuel exports, that is oil products, are low. This might suggest either a shortage of tankers because, for example, they rely on 20% of the tankers for oil products come from Greece, for example, or they have a shortage of things they can export, which would be diesel. They can still probably export a lot of mazut as they produce. They export a larger percentage of the mazut they produce. For diesel, they export 50%. For mazut, the figure is closer to 80, 90%. So that's why we're probably seeing the reduction in the number of loaded oil products tankers. And when it comes to LPG, there were no loaded tankers this week. Next, when it comes to Primorsk, we also had an adjustment there for the oil figure. It's down to 1.2 million barrels a day, which, given our caveats, is in line with what we expect for the sport. The average shipments for Primorsk per week were 1.1 million barrels a day, so it's operating at nominal capacity. For this week, it's a lot higher at almost 1.9 million barrels a day, and almost everything is underway, but one of them is going to Kaliningrad for some reason. So this is high for the sport. It might also mean that they have more oil to export as they have less capacity to refine, and that's why it's shipping more. And when it comes to oil products, we see only one tanker this week, which is very, very low for the sport. And finally, for Novorossiysk, we have an adjustment, a small one from last week, which brings down the loaded deadweight tonnage without the CBC at 0.4 million barrels a day. That's a bit low for the sport. So that's low in terms of crude that they're exporting. We didn't see an adjustment for the oil products. And for this week, the oil products, given that two of them have not actually left the port, and the oil products are just 1.6 million barrels a day, that's again low. And we see this across the entire week, that the loading of oil products has been low. And when it comes to crude oil exports without the CBC, the likely CBC tankers, that is the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, which exports Kazakh oil, they're at 1 million barrels a day, which is a bit high for this port. I'm more expecting it to be close to the rate of Ust-Luga, but it's not too high to suggest major oil exports increases. And this is it for the tanker data for this week. Again, I have to give the caveats that we track the nominal deadweight tonnage, not the useful cargo load. That is significantly lower. And we also are more cautious when looking at tankers that are loaded. Anything that's loaded and is still in the port will be listed here. And also, again, I have to say that this is not definitive when it comes to Caspian Pipeline Consortium tankers. A few of them a few of the remaining ones might have actually been from the Caspian Pipeline Consortium. And we have not enough sufficient data there because there's a lot of scrambling of GPS signals, and there's also issues with covering the satellite data for this port consistently. The other thing I have to say is Tuapse, we haven't seen any tankers there. Since it was hit, I think we've seen only one tanker report that it's going to Tuapse, but I haven't seen definitive proof that they have actually been continuously loading week after week from Tuapse. So maybe that port is almost completely taken offline by Ukrainian strikes. Now, when it comes to the major news from this week, I think the big one we should start with is that the Russian ruble for the week dropped from 73.44 rubles per dollar to 77.06 rubles per dollar. That's 3.5 rubles in terms of 1 week, which is significant for the Russian ruble, as it didn't stabilize. It continued to drop against the dollar, and it might continue to drop for the remainder of next week, for the entirety of next week. And also, when it comes to the euro exchange rate, it dropped from 84.17 rubles to 87.4 rubles. This is the official central bank rate, which monitors the banking over-the-counter operations and then does an average for them for the day. Now, for exporters, as I've mentioned, the strong ruble has been a problem for them, especially for the coal industry and for the steel industry. But I have to say that for Russians as a whole, this is bad for them in terms of inflation, as certain goods they import are going to become more expensive, and they're going to feel that in their pocket. Now, when it comes to the fuel news, I have a bit of a summary here. So over the week, most Russian governors and pundits blamed the shortages and on panic buying by the populace. There was one notable exception, and that happened yesterday. So the governor of Buryatia is someone you should watch, and he should probably stay away from windows, because he said that the shortage was because Ukrainian strikes have significantly reduced the refining capacity of Russia. And this is likely the new normal. So people should cope with this new reality, which means he's honest that there's going to be queues and there's going to be shortages of fuel, and there is not much that he can do as a governor. When it comes to prices, the highest black market price I've seen quoted was 500 rubles in Zabolkaysky Krai. This is for a liter of gasoline A95. That's over $24 per gallon. And it's close to, I think, 6 euros per liter. So the highest diesel price I've seen at a gas station was 200 rubles per liter. That's close to 2.5, 2.6 euros. No, maybe shouldn't do math on live broadcasting, but closer to 2.3, 2.4 euros per liter, and $9.6 per gallon. And when it comes to prices, in terms of wholesale prices, the highest I've seen was 160,000 rubles per a ton of A92 gasoline, which would make it over 110 rubles per liter, just of the selling price before transportation and operational costs. So to have a profit and operate as a gas station chain, you have to sell it probably for 130, 140 rubles per liter just to stay in business. And the gasoline shortage has gotten to previously uncharted territories like the Republic of Altai, which is remote and gets its fuel months ahead because there's just one road and one railway going into the region. It's like the remote regions up in the north. It wasn't impacted in 2025. When it comes to other regions that were seriously impacted, Irkutsk city is almost completely devoid of fuel, with only one gas station chain still offering gasoline. So the mayor tried 2 attempts to improve the situation. The first was by sending portable toilets to people in the queues for gasoline. That wasn't taken in very well. It was more of he was treated more of a clown by doing that. And he also urged businesses to switch en masse to remote work because they can't provide fuel for them. And an interesting phenomenon happened on Friday night, and it has been continuing every night since. An incredibly large portion of Russians spend their nights in their cars at ever-growing number of queues for fuel at gas stations, and some were waiting for more than half a day for fuel, so more than 12 hours. Especially from Irkutsk, a bunch of journalists from the local media went to a gas station chain and stayed there from noon to midnight in order to get gasoline. And they had to call in the police to counter people who were cutting the line and to prevent fights at the gas station because those were becoming more numerous. So you need police to actually guard gas stations right now, at least the ones that have fuel. So the government, because of this, decided not to ban, not because of this, but as a consequence of the shortages, had a meeting and they were considering the banning of the export of diesel. However, they decided not to do this. I'm thinking it's more due to decision paralysis because of how quickly this became a general fuel crisis, not just a gasoline crisis or a kerosene crisis, because jet fuel is also short. They are going to have another meeting on Monday, and they will again bring up the issue of banning diesel exports. The news is that at the last meeting on Friday, it was the Energy Ministry that was against the ban of diesel exports. I'm more leaning towards saying that they have decision paralysis because of how quickly this evolved. Another thing that we mentioned earlier is that Russia wanted to buy fuel from Kazakhstan. We said that it was 50,000 tons. However, I have to point out that in Kazakhstan, there is a ban on the export of gasoline and diesel and jet fuel till November 21st, 2026. They've already been in over 6 months of a ban of gasoline. The country has a significant shortage of gasoline, and it itself is lowering the import duties to zero so it can buy fuel from China. However, I have to point out that Chinese refining has been low this year, so it's doubtful if there be enough to satisfy foreign demand. We also found out that Kazakhstan had a contract with Russia to supply it with 300,000 tons of jet fuel, but it had only received 186,000 tons so far from that contract. So I expect that Kazakhstan doesn't have any fuel to offer to Russia. Usually, Kazakhstan imports fuel from Russia despite its own refining to cover shortages. So something like 20-30% of the fuel, 10 to 30% of the fuel in Kazakhstan actually comes from Russia. Russia is their main supplier when they're short. So don't expect them to actually have fuel to provide Russia. Or if they provide it, it's going to be an incredibly expensive thing, and it will require concessions on the Russian behalf that are probably more than what the Kremlin wants to offer. Imports came from Belarus. They arrived on Spimex. They were traded on the commodities exchange. However, they were trading at a 50-60% premium to Russian fuel. So if gas stations bought them, they would be selling gasoline at 100 rubles, which is still better than Russian depot prices, where you have to go as far as, like I said, 130, 140 rubles. But it's still not low enough for the general public. And the other final thing when it comes to international impacts and government news is that Kyrgyzstan started having shortages of gasoline itself. It is 90% dependent on Russian fuel, so it's completely, almost entirely dependent on Russian fuel imports. And if those stop even for an instant, it's going to have serious problems because it has some of the lowest stocks when it comes to reserves of fuel. And we should probably see something similar happening in Tajikistan and also something similar happening in Mongolia. Those two are also heavily dependent on Russian fuel imports. They can import from China, but they're not going to be able to cope with the price because they get fuel from Russia at an extremely low price for them compared to what they can get from China. Now back to the regional impacts. Zabalkaysky Krai, Vladimir region, Ryazan. I've seen also a couple more. They have intercity and municipal buses being impacted, so they're not running as much in terms of the number of bus trips per day. They requested to increase ticket prices by up to 80% because of the fuel prices. And they're going to stop running buses probably this week that comes almost entirely for certain routes because of the shortage of diesel, not just gasoline. In Ryazan also, there were jails, hospitals, and municipalities and schools that couldn't find anyone to fulfill their tenders for fuel. So I'm expecting that those will not have fuel. Maybe as emergency services, jails and hospitals will be refueled by the government, but I don't expect the municipalities and the schools to have fuel for their operations. In Zabalkaysky Krai and Irkutsk, a heightened state of alert was declared, like we said, and there's a limit on refueling for those two regions of only 15 liters per person per day. So they're basically one step away from declaring an emergency. In Zabalkaysky Krai, this is something that came today. Only 6 large Rosneft gas stations are left working for 1 million people in the region, spread over a region the size of maybe Germany in terms of the distance you have to cover. And also garbage collection in 4 districts of the region has been stopped. So the other final thing from the regions that we heard is that the new search term that's all the rage in Russia is how to siphon fuel out of a car. And hand in hand with that, there's a noticeable increase in the theft of gasoline from cars. So people are doing that every night to their neighbors and friends so they can have fuel for themselves. Sometimes they're siphoning it. Sometimes they're just drilling a hole in the tank and taking it that way, basically ruining the car. But this is something that's been growing in Russia. For the fuel, when it comes to secondary issues with the jet fuel and the aviation gasoline, the Association of Antu Operators, because that's a popular small transport plane to operate in Russia, it's been asking the government to start regulating the price of jet fuel and aviation gasoline because they can't find any. And they have been forced to switch from aviation gasoline to car gasoline because of the price. The Azimut airline, which is operating from the southern parts of Russia, has reduced its flights because there's not enough fuel in southern Russia. They've had their orders being fulfilled at 70% and at a higher price. So they might completely stop operations over the next few weeks if this continues because the price of jet fuel isn't going down. When it comes to official statements, on Sunday, Russian Deputy Prime Minister Novak confirmed that the government is looking for ways to import fuel. Some would have likened that to someone looking for ways to import sand in the Sahara, but this is where Russia is now. And also, they've introduced measures that will reduce the amount of fuel Russian refineries are required to sell on the commodities exchange Pemex. It's going to be lowered from 15% to 10%, so that the gas station chains of the big fuel companies continue to have fuel, but that means that they're basically sacrificing the independent gas station chains. As I mentioned earlier, they make up 60% of all the gas station chains in Russia and serve around 40% of the people. So that would mean these 40% of people are left behind because of this. So overall, things are very bleak, and I don't think there's any hope in sight for the Russian fuel crisis, at least next week. We'll see what they can do with imports and how they can unload it in Russia, because that would also need specific facilities. But for now, I expect things over the next week to just get worse and not improve, because the strikes on refineries and depots are continuing. Now, when it comes to Russian oil exports as a whole, the discount on the Russian Ural oil in India widened to the highest level it's been since March 2026. So since before the conflict in the Middle East. For July delivery, the discount to dated Brent in the Indian West Coast rose to 4.10 dollars per barrel, and by June 19th, it had risen to $4.35 per barrel. For example, overall, the Indian price of oil fell by another $8, so to $75.86 per barrel, which means that at Russian ports, the euro prices are also dropping sharply. So in the Baltic ports, it dropped by $8.73 per barrel to $55.71 per barrel. So we're back to below what the Russian government wants for its budget, which is $59 per barrel. In Novorossiysk, prices fell by $8.38 per barrel to $56.46 per barrel. And when it comes to discounts, when you're also including the price of transportation, they widened to $24.5 per barrel in the Baltic and $23.75 in Novorossiysk for 140-ton shipments, so 155-ton tankers. And this is from pressure from weak demand in India, China, and lower Chinese refinery margins, lower fuel consumption in the area, and the expectation of higher Middle East supply, which we've already seen with a lot more tankers moving from the Strait of Hormuz, despite a flare-up yesterday. So the U.S. Treasury has also issued a license allowing purchases of Iranian crude oil that's going to last until August 21st. And importers are delaying to see how the deal between the U.S. and Iran is going to go. So they're waiting for even lower prices to buy oil, which means that likely for the next week, if there are no more flare-ups, Russian oil prices are going to go further down in the 50s and maybe reach the 40s. When it comes to Iranian oil shipments, they fell by 1.6 times from February to May to 2.65 million barrels a day. But a sanction easing could also free up those shipments and all the storage in the Persian Gulf and tankers in Southeast Asia. And from June 18th to the 24th, 18 non-Iranian tankers left the Strait of Hormuz carrying 30 million barrels of oil. In China's Shandong province, the Ural discount stayed at $1 per barrel, while the delivery price fell by $7.1 per barrel to $76.86. And Asian refiners are actually shifting their inventories and are seeking alternatives to buying more expensive crude because they're also reducing their runs on weak margins because of the high price for a while. And China has also stopped buying oil for its strategic reserves, which has increased the pressure on the price because there's less demand for oil as a whole. And Russian seaborne oil exports for the month fell 1% month over month in May to 4.03 million barrels a day, whereas shipments to India fell by 46% to 1.2 million barrels a day, and exports to China rose by 1% to 905,000 barrels per day. I would point out that at this point, we're well below what Russia needs for its budget when it comes to the oil price of its raw oil. And we should see the budget deficits for the following months increase, as they're going to get less oil and gas revenue, but at the same time we'll have to probably pay still high fuel subsidies because of the high price of fuel all over the world. Now when it comes to banking, they have an issue with liquidity. So the liquidity deficit of Russian banks rose from 0.6 trillion rubles in January 2026 to 2 trillion rubles by June. This is most likely due to the demand of Russians for cash in the first half of 2026. In 2025, at no point did the liquidity deficit go over 900 billion rubles, so this is quite significant that it's double that right now. And this is a side effect of people withdrawing money from Russian banks due to the shutdowns of mobile internet, coupled with the outflows due to lower interest rates on deposits, as the interest rate has been falling down. When it comes to commodities and metals, Russia decreased its exports of aluminum to the EU 4.5 times for the period of January to April 2026, when compared to 2025. So it's down to just 63.6 million euros. And in May, exports of aluminium to the EU dropped 2.7 times to just 3 million euros worth. So we're down to our reliance on Russian aluminum seems to be decreasing. When it comes to Russian steel, the prices of the export steel through the Black Sea fell by $10 per ton in the last week to $485 per ton. This is down from the peak of $500 per ton at the height of the conflict in the Middle East in early May and late April. And the decline is driven by weak Turkish demand, falling rebar prices, and lower Turkish scrap prices, which dropped by 2% to $392 per ton. Russians themselves have a limited ability to discount further because of the strong ruble, but that will change over the next few weeks as the ruble weakens. And also the domestic price of scrap has been rising. Prices rose 2% in the week of June 12th to June 19th to almost 18,000 rubles per ton, and are up 9.7% since May. So that's their input material, which is now more expensive if you're an electric metallurgical plant. And Russia increased its exports of steel billets to Turkey historically over the first 4 months by 130% to 474,000 tons. China's exports rose by 270% to 378,000 tons. And Malaysia, which used to be a big exporter, actually decreased its export by 47.7% to 190,000 tons. But we're expecting that the purchases of steel billets in Turkey are going to slow down significantly in June as Turkish buyers wait for better prices. Part of this is because they expect more facilities to come online, mainly from the Middle East, where you expect Iranian billets to gradually recover in terms of exports. Their prices rose slightly to $410 to $415 per ton in the same week. And the decrease was significant because output from the Middle East in terms of steel fell by 14.6% for the period of January to May 2026. So now as that comes online and as some Chinese steel is now available at lower prices because of the lower freight costs due to the end of the conflict in the Middle East, or it's at least the resumption of some traffic from the Strait of Hormuz, we're going to expect them to compete more aggressively with Russia's own steel producers who are exporting via the Black Sea. Now, when it comes to oil and gas news, we have just one. So Gazprom's share price fell to below 100 rubles for the first time since 2008. At one point, they were talking that this is going to be a €1 trillion euro company. I don't think that's going to be the case, given what is going to happen, what's happening with their share, with the share price, and they fell to the lowest level they've been since the financial crisis. Next, when it comes to demand for warehouses in Russia for the first half of 2026, it dropped to the lowest level it's been since 2020, and the number of transactions dropped by 57% to just 603,000 square meters. As we've been talking, Russian warehouse construction is no longer a profitable business, and demand for Russian warehouses is dropping as demand in the general economy is dropping significantly. Now, when it comes to interesting data points, the available apartments for rent in Russia's 40 largest city rose by 28.8% year over year in June. And this is due to the increase in supply and limited demand as the migrants who accounted for renting, for example, 45% of the cheap apartments in Moscow just left. Someone's running a campaign bad-mouthing migrant workers in Russia. I don't know who he is, but maybe he's doing a lot of damage to the Russian economy as he's doing that. When it comes to kvass, which is one of Russia's popular drinks, they introduced duties this year, and the effect is almost immediate. In April, year over year, sales dropped 19%, and this is directly linked to the excise tax on the drink because it has an alcoholic content. In mid-June, we also have news in terms of the food supply in Russia. The price of chicken, so broiler carcasses, rose to 200 rubles per kilogram, which is 10% higher than in June 2025, so double what the official inflation is. And when it comes to other types of chicken meats, the increase in the price has been 26%, so well above what Russians can stomach in terms of increases. Another interesting data point is that for the first time, the price on the secondary housing market has started to decrease in Russia's 16 largest cities. Over May, it's down by just 0.1%, but right now it's going to decrease probably quicker with less availability of mortgages. And we have a few more interesting data points to go through. So in terms of summer holidays, from the 1st of June to the June the 18th, the number of bookings of Russians for domestic holiday trips decreased by 12%. And from January to June 2026, the drop is estimated at 5.6%. And this is directly linked to the strikes in Krasnodar Krai and Crimea. When it comes to the lumber industry, the output is going to be probably 2 to 4% lower in 2026 due to the strong ruble and the drop in demand in domestic and international markets. What is worse is that only the large lumber companies are expected to remain profitable this year. So that's another industry to watch in terms of declining profits and declining output. Although the recovery in the more weaker ruble may help them over the year to compensate those losses. And we're down to just two interesting data points. The first one is Russia shooting itself in the foot. So it's going to introduce from September 2026 a new duty on the export of diamonds. But the state diamond miner Arosa reported that this is going to basically hurt 29% of its EBITDA. It's just going to go away, because 90% of the company's revenue comes from the export of diamonds. So if you put a new duty, you might fill in the budget, but you might also damage the profits of another company that you're relying on. And the final interesting data point is from the dairy industry. So for the period of January to May, 45% less new dairy companies were opened in Russia to just 109. And this is due to overproduction in the sector, which has led to raw milk prices dropping by 23% in 2026. And for inflation, the official inflation, as reported by Rosstat, for the period of the 16th to the 22nd of June was 0.25%. So for the entire month, it would be 1% if it stayed that. And for June so far, the inflation is 0.63%, and for the year, 3.9%. The main reason is that gasoline prices in a week went up by 3% and diesel by 2.7%. And also, Russia decided not to have an auction for that this week because they said the prices were too volatile, which means that they were expecting to be forced to provide a yield of over 50% as the government bond index dropped to 114 points for the first time since October 2025. And I guess they can't afford to pay these high yields when the interest rate is this low. So that's it for me for this week. I think that's all, yes.
Thank you, Stanimir, as always, for your detailed report on the Russian economy. Even the Kvass data doesn't escape you. So, yeah, we'll check in with you next week. So now we have a presentation from our colleague Daniele about his recent article on Alabuga. Alabooga is like a industrial zone in Russia. It's responsible for a lot of the drone production that Russia uses for these long-range Shahed strike drones. Many moons ago, there was like a leak that happened. Some documents were hacked, some emails were hacked, and we did a segment on it at Tochny. But back then, the scale of the facility was much smaller, and it was crazy, man. They were using imported African migrant workers as a lot of the main labor force, and also like student internships. And that was like a majority of the labor force there. So it's like a crazy story where Russia gave Iran gold bars, and they made this drone factory that uses like African women and students at the Polytechnic University to build Russia's strike drone program. But it's been many years. They've had to scale this program up, and Daniele has been following it in much more detail than I have since back then. So Daniele, what has become of Alabuga since the early days?
Hi, good evening. So, Alabooga essentially has seen a significant increase in drone production. In the article, I started the article with an image that is not from our research, but from Kyle Glenn, who is another analyst who is following the drone strikes using Shahed or the Shahed-derived drones over Ukraine. And the data that you can see is that in July 2024, at the very beginning, we can say there was less than 100 drones. And then in a year time, we were around 6,000. There was a small drop. And then now in May, not now, but in May, we were around 7,500 drone per month. So you can see the increase sustained in the last 2 years from 2024. And if you start with the slideshow, we can show the plant, and we can show also some of the initial research that has been done. So this is Alabooga site. Alabooga, for who doesn't still know, is a special economic zone in Tartastan. This means that companies that establish their facilities in this region have a series of benefits, both financial but also logistical, because, for example, the area of Alabuga site, which is a very large site, as you can see, not all these buildings are for drone production, mostly those in the lower part of the site. But the site has different other facilities that produce, for example, carbon fiber, glass fiber, and also there is a former air liquid site that produce industrial gases on site. So Alabooga have seen, of course, has been covered pretty much extensively by also research center regarding its expansion. And so I decided to focus my attention on something else, in particular on what could be the indication of a scale up of the production, and is that is real, or there is something else happening, which is increasing the production, which is not in Alabooga. Now, if you go to the next slide, please. We started by trying to analyze the production. This was an older research that we have done and that demonstrated that there was a profound use of manpower, in the sense that you have the entire airframe produced by hand using vacuum bagging and composite technology, which is not bad per se, but for the volume that this plant is capable of outputting, it's very, very laborious. In fact, there is a kind of army of people employed to do this. Now, if we can go next slide, you will see, for example, an example here. You have the lower part of the airframe being molded, and the layup of the carbon fiber cloth put by hand inside the mold, and then resin applied with rollers. You can see on the right, next to the guy in blue, you can see the carbon fiber cloth waiting to be taken, probably pre-cut before, to be placed in the right position before resin is applied. So all these method, as you can see, is done in the same way all the way along. This is a very long manufacturing site. So this was for what regards the airframe. So I decided to point my attention to the engine, because the engine, at the beginning, we knew that the Russian had problem with the engine. They bought engines from China, but very quickly they learned, they reverse engineered, and then they started to improve and develop their own engine. And one of the particularities that we have been able to see is the fact that the Russian essentially started a localized production of engines. You can go to the next slide, please. Now, many of this information comes from the video that was released around 11 months ago, roughly June. And this was posted by Zedva TV, has a demonstration of the might of the industrial work of Russia. And in this image, you can see one shelf, very, very large shelf on the left, with all these engines stacked together. And I started to count the number of engines, and I started to observe also the labels that are handwritten on each engine, because these brings up a number, a serial number. You can go to the next slide. Oh, sorry, no. I think they get confused. No worries. You can go back on the previous one. We can work on that. Yes. So the point of the analysis was to try to understand, first of all, if we can estimate by using it's called the tank number exercise. Essentially, you use some statistics by knowing a certain number of serial number and knowing when they were obtained. You can estimate statistically, roughly, the number of whatever, in this case, engines, at the time of World War II was transmissions for tanks, that the adversary is building. Now, this has a series of drawbacks, of course. First of all, it's not accurate if the numbering is not sequential. It's not accurate if the numbering doesn't have only numbers. So if we start to have also letter, it becomes a problem. And also, you need to be sure that they are produced all in the same sequence. So essentially, the number grows, never goes back. Now, I think it's probably several slides after a couple, if you go forward until you see an engine. No. No. Very strange. Okay, yes, this one. This one is a slide that contains a lot of information. First of all, you can see few numbers written very well on the top of the engine. So that is a serial number. There are also other pictures that I do not put here, where this number is reported. And a good sign is that is sequential, is always repeated, and is consistent. At the same time, there is also another important information, which is the shelf number. You can see 47.4, 46.2. The number after the digit is the shelf in height. You have a 4 level, and each shelf has a number. And by using some upscaling and some careful analysis of the video, I was able to see that there were more than 46, 47, 45. So there are a lot of shelves available for storage. And from the video and from the images, you can see that because of the size of the engine, only one engine can go. So you have each shelf have a certain number of shelves. So these allowed me to do some estimation, and we figured out that the plant was showing only in this picture more than 1,880 engines in this day as the video was given. Now, the estimation from the statistical estimation from the serial number gave us a larger number, of course, which was around 4,600. Now, the point is we don't have and we don't see all the engines, because not all the engines are in the same location. Not all the we don't know if there is more shelfies. The highest number that I could see was 47, but it's possible that there is a 48, 49, we don't know. So the calculation was done taking the assumption that the maximum number of shelves was 47. But the magnitude and the order that the statistics and the evidence show us is that we are in the ballpark figure. And also, by looking at the data that regarding the number of strikes, not in the month of the video was shown, but the month after and the one after again, so between June and July, we see more or less the number of between 4,000 and 5,000 drones per month. So this means that the number that we estimated with this simple exercise is not far from the reality. So this means that the data that we are gathering, the strikes that we are monitoring and the strikes that other analysts are monitoring, including OSINT analysts, it's not far from the reality. And at least from looking in retrospective, of course, we don't have new images. We don't have access, for example, to the serial number of the engines of destroyed Shahed, which is probably a valuable information to further track the production rates. But how the Russians have been able to do this, how they have been able to produce so many engines. So we need to be fair. There is a good engineering work, but also we have to be honest. This engine is quite simple. It's a two-stroke, 4-piston engine, and is air-cooled. It's very simple. And so it's easy to manufacture, but you need a lot of manufacturing capability on site if you want to do these engines on site. And this is why I started to look at the video on other characteristics. And now I'm sorry if the presentation messed up. Sorry, Maurice. So if you can go backward, there is an image. Go one, no, going again. Okay, this one. So this one is, I call this melting and casting. So the Alabooga plant has the ability to melt aluminium and potentially also introduce other elements to obtain not pure aluminium, which is not very good for this type of application, but produce some kind of alloys by mixing other elements. And they have several of these crucibles available. So this means that they can produce on site the aluminum alloy that they need. They don't need to buy it. And the reason why I have to do this is because the production of an engine requires two types of technology: casting and forging. Now, you cast most of the time a very complex geometry. If you think about the geometry of the cylinder, which has all the cooling surfaces, the inside is can be also particularly complex in terms of shape. It's much easier to cast these type of engines. So you have a mold, you fill with liquid aluminum alloy, and then you let it cool, and then you can or open the die or just break it, and then you have the part done. The forging is, so and then the other side, the other way is using forging. But for normally you use forging for components that do not have a too high demand in terms of geometry. So you can forge a simple component. You can go and forge very complex as well, don't take me wrong. But for this type of engine, probably there are very few parts that you really need to be forged. Also because forging operations are much, much more complex, as you will see. So the next stage after the casting, he's doing some heat treatment. Now, if you can scroll one forward, I think, again, yes, this one. This one show you the heat treatment part. Now, the heat treatment part is what makes your casted material and sometimes also forged material stronger or essentially better in certain aspect, depending on the type of heat treatment, in the type of material, the type of production method. Here you can see in the top figure, you can see an operator which is handling a very hot, we can call these pots or casket. It's very difficult to see, but by experience, this is essentially a basket with a lot of components that have been forged. Potentially, these are all together joined because they have been cast, and the channel that brings the material everywhere in the mold still attached. So these parts are all together bounded as a single body, and they will be separated later. Now they are being heated up in a furnace that normally can be by induction heating, but I think this one probably is just a normal furnace. You can see the flames. It's a very violent process, and you can see the furnace is open, and the basket is extracted and then introduced in the rapid cooling tank, essentially a quenching process. The temperature of the part is increased in the furnace and then slowed down as fast as possible to kind of stop the microstructure from changing. This is a normal process, but what not concerned, but what is incredible is the amount of these facility, because you can see they are numbered. You can see an 18 in there, a 21, there is another 22. So there are at least 22 heat treatment facilities, which comprise a furnace and a quenching tank. You can see from the site, from the top image, you can see there is this orange clamp with the furnace open, and then the basket goes in this other tank, which has a two vertical motor, electric motor. These probably are agitator, allows you to move the fluids, and then this is load. The basket goes inside the aperture that you can see here. But behind the operator, you can see another furnace, and then next you have another pit. So this means that there are several of these available for production. So this means that the engine that we have seen before, they are definitely produced at Alabooga, and Alabooga has the ability to prepare the material and to cast it. We don't see where the casting is taking place in the video. They have been very careful in that, but you know, if you work in this field, that is happening in the same factory, because you won't have these shipped from another factory to just do the heat treatment here. You would do immediately after you have done the casting. Now, if you can go, I think backward, sorry, a couple of slides. If you can go backward a couple of slides. Again. Okay, yes. So now there are also, as I told you, forging operation. Now in the video we see only one press, but it's likely that there is more than one. You can see they have this blue color. I checked, it's not Schuler, it's not a German press, it's not a European press. It's probably produced or in China or in Russia, but the producer is not known. Is a screw press. So essentially, what this is normally used to have the possibility to forge quite small part, but when you required a lot of force in a small form factor, and you need a very fast deformation to occur. Now, this is all manual operated. As a kind of normal things, you don't expect robots or stuff like this. Even in Europe, we started to introduce automation, but we still have a human picking the part from one side to the other. Now, in the back, you can see what I'm quite sure is an induction heating line. So essentially a small piece of metal passed through these coils, which are essentially there is a current going through this coil. The coil, by induction, they heat up the piece of metal. So there is no flame involved. You can see the operator is standing just next to it. I'm not saying that this is very safe, but it's not going to kill him in the immediate. Then the billet goes down to a second area, and there you have a cross wedge rolling operation. So this means essentially there is two rollers that have some indents, some cavities, and the part that has been heated up goes through that, and they do this because they need to create a preform, so something that can fit the cavity that they have below the press. You can see these in the image below. And why they do this? Because they, of course, have the part that is forged one time, then is put in another hole. You can see there are two holes. Then another heat arrives from the machine, and these finally forge the part. So you have a multiple blow operation. Now, this is normally, I don't think this is done on aluminum. These are probably steel component. And for example, these can be part of the engine that requires more strength. In particular, they require to be tolerant to high temperature, but also to torque and fatigue, despite a Shahed has a limited lifespan due to its type of operation. And so this is very important because tell us that there is a kind of introduction of several steps in the production line, united with the composite capability in producing composite airframes. This essentially tell us that the site has been significantly upgraded, has been significantly expanded, and is definitely capable of producing the number of engine that we estimated, essentially. And our analysis essentially went through these, and in a nutshell has shown what they are capable of, essentially. So that's what the article deals with. And of course, this is important because also kind of align with what we were saying, that Alabooga is probably one of the most important sites for the Russian war machine, because at the moment, to be honest, I think it's the only site in Russia that has such level of adaptation and the production integration. I haven't seen these at this level of efficiency, especially because you have to think that they are doing these constantly every day for now 2 years, 3 years. So the level of attrition, and this also goes alongside, for example, the discussion on the alumina that was coming from Ireland. That personally was something that should raise concern, because the production of aluminium, of course, occur in Russia. Russia can produce aluminium, but the alumina is a precursor. And by giving them a precursor, you essentially give them the ability to produce weapons and eventually continue to wage war on Ukraine, and potentially in the future also on NATO. And that's it. I don't know if there is any more question.
Well, yeah, thank you, Daniele. Yeah, there's a couple questions in chat. So one person said, if they could reach Alabuga and bypass air defense, how hard is it to hit that factory hard enough to have a significant impact on production?
Can you repeat? Sorry.
So the question is, if they could reach Alabuga and bypass the air defenses, how hard is it to hit the factory hard enough so how difficult is it to hit the factory hard enough to have a significant impact on the production?
Well, it depends by the weapon system that they use. At this point, any strike with an FP5 or a larger attack drone would make significant damage to the factory, to the point that the factory has to stop. Probably substation are a good starter for smaller medium drones. I think that there are several things that can be done. Also, destroying the composite factory that is just next to the drone factory, which we covered, the Umatex plant, which is definitely providing the core material for the airframe. The destruction of that, or even simple the destruction of the air liquid, former air liquid site, would introduce significant delays in production, because they would lose the access to noble gases, which they need. And of course, because these are cryogenic gases, they would need to do a lot of logistic magic to bring constant amount of tons of cryogenic gases from another place, because at the moment it's produced on site. So there are different options, and I think as has been said by the listener, the air defense probably is significant and is creating issues to attack the plant. But as soon as they are able to penetrate that, I think what has been done, for example, in Volgograd, can take out the factory for good.
Thank you, Daniela. So the next question, I assume this is talking about the engine block. Do they not machine it down to a tighter specification after casting? I can't imagine pistons want to move well without that step. It seems like you would want to do the milling before the heat treatment.
So the heat treatment, probably yes, it could be. It depends by their production criteria. I agree with what he says. They have significant machining capability as well. That's for sure. The video shows rows and rows of CNC multi-axis machine, so they could easily do the machining and then the heat treatment. They don't do anything outside the site. That's 100% sure. There is no part leaving Alabooga site. At least the compound.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Like, that's the whole concept behind a place like Alabuga, right? I think in the US we call it maybe an industrial park, right? Like you have a bunch of factories. Like if you look at the aviation industry in California, right? Like there's a bunch of factories that are all working on similar stuff on the like planes, and it's convenient to have them all kind of like together. So they built kind of an infrastructure around like having a bunch of factories in one spot that can kind of all work together, and it kind of helps everyone be more efficient. And that's what Russia's trying to set up here. So it makes sense that that's the goal, to have everything like produced on site, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Someone was asking about the current situation with the Irish aluminum refinery. So that's like a big campaign going on right now to try to get this thing, interdicted on some level by European sanctions. It's like one of the largest aluminum refineries in Europe, and it's right now there's like aluminum being exported to Russia, which is, as far as I understand, being used to build weapons. As far as I know, there hasn't been any like direct development on it in terms of like there hasn't been a ban on it yet, or any action by the Irish government or the European Union specifically to do anything yet. But there's a pretty strong, like, I guess, like pressure campaign going on like social media and other places to get more attention on it. And I don't know. I mean, it seems like hopefully something will be done. It just needs maybe more traction in the like European Parliament. I would assume that's where it would probably action would take place. But yeah, does anyone else have any information on the aluminum stuff or yeah?
No, honestly, I didn't went down that path. I know that there was a lot of frustration on that side. And just to be clear, I think they were exporting alumina, not the aluminium. But the other issue that that at the moment I'm foreseeing is that there are probably an enormous amount of companies in Russia that are allegedly civil company, but they work, I mean, for defense contractors, and you can see these very easily by looking for tender. There are names, there are people who sign contract, but they are not in the register of the sanctions. So evading, most of the bigger companies that are involved in defense, of course, they are all sanctioned, but not all the subcontractor. And this is a problem because I understand that is kind of difficult to track because it's quite laborious, but I'm quite frustrated by the fact that nor EU, UK, or US have tried to establish an investigative group that one by one looks for connection. Because if a group of civilians in their free time can locate them and have proof, why they can't do the same? I'm sure there is the will, but probably there is not resources in this direction because,
Yeah, it's a tough problem, right? There's a lot of like these small companies, and like they're using all kinds of crazy like third party methods to move stuff around and all that. So it requires like active tracking, and the US has basically, as far as I understand, mostly stopped tracking stuff actively that's not like a blatant violation of the sanctions. And the EU, it generally takes them a while to kind of build consensus around a specific sanctions issue. Yeah, I don't know. It's an important issue. Hopefully, we'll see more action on this. Alumina export. It's like alumina is like the raw material they smelt into aluminum. So it's like, I don't know. They're sending that to Russia, and then Russia's turning it into aluminum, and then they're turning that into weapons. Thanks for the question. I think there's a question for Stanimir, which is basically what percentage of a fuel shortage would be expected to be manageable, and what sort of shortage would really break civilian life down?
In the summer, even a 20-30% will break civilian life in certain parts of Russia. And we've already seen something like that happening in several regions. And it's probably going to get worse over the next few weeks as their stocks are evaporating. So what I mean is that in terms of Irkutsk and Zabalkaysky Krai, civilian life there has broken down. People are staying 12 hours in queues to get fuel. You can't do anything during the day. You have to sleep in your car. And these are parts of Russia where you need a car. And also in those queues, there are trucks and buses, which means they're going to have impact on just distribution of goods and impact on the transportation of people by public transport. So we've already seen it in two regions that are outside of Crimea, where it's starting to severely impact people's lives. The two governors of the regions actually flew to Moscow to talk with Novak on getting fuel, but I don't think they're going to get enough. They talked about 600 tons of fuel coming to Irkutsk, which is nothing in terms of what they need. And if we compare it to what's happened in Crimea already, there you don't have any refrigerated goods anymore. You don't have bread in stores. So something similar might come to Irkutsk and Zabalkaysky Krai. Although I have to say that they're not going to experience the same way they in Crimea experiences electricity shortage, but they could experience similar level of supply disruption.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, now we'll go back to Stanimir's segment. So we're done with Alabooga, and now we're moving to another metallurgical plant, which is Red October and Titan Barikadi. Daniele, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to bring this up because, as many knows, yesterday I think 3 FP5 Flamingo had hit Titan Barikadi and probably destroyed at least 3 of the complex in the perimeter of the factory, and I think this is. Of course, a very important success, but I wanted to renew and also again remind a work that we have done 2 years ago, especially on Red October and Titan Barikadi. Now, at the time, if you remember, there was a lot of discussion about the capability of Russia to regenerate barrels. And there was an article, I think, from the New York Times, or there was an article from the American US press that was talking about the number of radial forging machine. And of course, there was a profound underestimation of the real number of machines that Russia had. We investigated a lot and we discovered a lot of connection. And I want to remind this connection in particular. Now, aside the radial forging capabilities, Red October is a metallurgical plant. It's a very big plant that can cast and forge at the same time. They can do primary forging, which means you take your constituent, you cast an ingot, and then you forge in a certain shape. They can produce a plate, they can produce sheet of metal, and they can produce bars or hexagonal bars, but also blanks. Blanks are essentially cylinders that are very much high specific in terms of dimensional correctness, and normally are used in secondary forging using a radial forging machine to obtain barrels or axle or any axisymmetrical object. And why they are so connected with Titan Barikadi? Well, the reason is because if you go to the next slide, by looking at the history of the plant, I essentially, I'm sorry that it's not, I don't know if it's very much readable, but essentially Krasny Oktober, which is Red October, of course, is a very old factory. I mean, it started before 4047, but the critical part that happened in during the year 2000, because in 2008 PO Barikadi was sold to Red October plant. So Red October acquired Barikadi, and in this process, essentially, they becomes very close. And what Barikadi was producing a series of product from Iskander, at the time also other older Soviet era missile, but also barrel for artillery. And who was providing the core material for all this production? Red October. And now, Red October never advertised this as their product, but in their website and also in file that they left open to access, you can essentially see, at least we were able to see, their commitment in procurement with the defense industry. And these essentially show a deep connection between a theoretically purely civilian enterprise and a military one. and they are also next door, literally in the sense, because the barricade is just above Red October. You can go into the next slide. So this is one of the things that we were investigating last year, and I was able to show you this image from Sentinel. This is the new a new site just after just going north or up in this image. You have Titan Barricadi, so they share literally a tree line, and Red October was building and is building a new forging aisle with an enormous press, a lot of furnaces, a lot of heat treatment capacities, and also new ability for producing blanks for radial forging. And how we know this? Well, we, by luck, we obtain access to a OneDrive that was left open for consultation with the public. And if you go down, you can see, for example, technical drawing of the future plant, which is currently building. If you go the next slide. Yeah, that's the forging aisle. You can see here on the left, you have where the large press will be, and on the right, there are all the furnaces and all the shops, the workshops. So it's a very big site. If you go to the next slide, even you can see the prolimetry, you can see the press, you can see a lot of the component. So all this information is has been carefully detailed. And why I'm showing this? Because yesterday, a very important attack has been done, and a very important site has been damaged for sure for a long time. I don't think Titan Barricade will be operational anytime soon. But we still have a factory like Red October, and there are many other like Electrostal and others that are perfectly capable of delivering military good to the industry that then will transform these as weapon. And not all of them are on sanction list simply because they are classified as a civilian enterprise, but they are not civilian at all. Even Electrostal has one of the most advanced radial forging press at the moment. Now, the only thing that is creating issues to the Russian is increasing costs in energy, difficulties in casting a small batch because they don't there is a scale of economy behind that. But if they can figure out the economical aspect, they have all the capabilities. And as we have seen, they are still expanding their military industries. So now, of course, it's good that Titan Barricade has been hit. It's good that probably is out from the good, but there are a lot of other things to do because there are a lot of other industries like Red October, which is an enormous and very good and very competent factory. There is people that knows how to do things, and there are machines. In many cases, especially Red October and Electrostal, renewed by us because since 28 until 2015, we sold them the best technology for forging, casting, and heat treat, and we also form them in many cases. So we deal with what we have done in the past, essentially now. But this is to give you an understanding that yes, you can take out an industry, a factory, but there are many that works in the shadow in this gray area that is difficult both to sanction and both to decide to strike, because you have to take some responsibilities also when you perform a kinetic action. And despite it's easy to justify an attack on a military factory, which is definitely a military factory, I understand it's much more complex to do the same on a theoretically civil factory. But this is one of the few examples that we have where we know they have been involved in manufacturing weapon and supporting defense industries, which in this case is less defense, it's more offensive. And that's it. Sorry, I just want to bring this up because I know that a lot of people are very happy about this type of strikes, but I think there's still a lot to do, also in terms of sanctions, because sanctions are working, but now that the big fishes are caught into the net, we need to make the net more tight in order to keep also these other smaller ones, which are not small by size, but small for their footprint in the tender system that probably is visible from a point of view of law. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniele. Okay, we just got a couple more questions, and I think we'll wrap up. Someone asked on Twitter, are they running 3 shifts 24/7, and are they still using immigrants and youth as the primary labor source, or is there a different approach now?
Okay, so on these, I have data and analysis on other site. Yes, they are running pretty much around the clock, as we do, honestly. And yes, they are taking immigrants. But the word immigrants is very, and Stanimir can add on this, maybe because he's following more the Russian society, but immigrants means a lot of things in Russia. What I've seen is there is a definitely influx of people from the Far East. So this means that people who are Russian, but for the Russians are kind of foreign because they come from the eastern side of Russia, deep east. And this is sometimes is something that you know because there are scandals on their accommodation, on how they have treated, and you remember similar issues happening also in Alabuga with people from Africa not trained, put on chemicals, put on doing chemical work without any training, without any PPE. You remember this type of protest in these regards. And similar things happen in different other cities from Perm, Kazan, and other sites. And we have proof of also of a building being built to house people. There have been plenty of studies on Alabooga where dormitories are rising. So yes, there is an influx of immigrants. There is also today, I think, a document from Alabooga was taken and from a group of hackers who has shown evidence of a 15 years old internship used in the plant to produce weapons. And to be frank with you, they not even shy away from this, because if you remember a few weeks ago, months ago, there was a video from Russia, from Alabooga, that was showing probably people in their 16, 17 at the most years old, telling how they are proud of working on Alabooga and producing essentially weapons. So yes, it's happening. We don't know the number, but it's happening.
And if I can add something, at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, Alabooga was there and advertised itself as an internship place and promised salaries of over 300,000 rubles to the interns, who are usually 15, 16 to 19, 20 years old. This is happening in the open in Russia. As for how they treat Easterners, there had to be a court order in Moscow to ban advertisements in which they said for Slavs only. So there's also deep racism towards people from the regions and from the ethnic republics.
A decent salary for gold tier students, maybe, but not wood tier. I don't know. In the leaks, they have like a ranking system for the low producing people. It was like wood tier, and then there was like copper and silver and gold tier.
It's a high salary for everyone in Russia. And it was advertised at its biggest economic forum by the people in charge of Alabooga in the open and televised on the first channel.
They don't hide anymore.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they actively advertise. I think that's they were doing it on like YouTube and stuff until they finally and they do it on like Twitch and all kinds of places. It's crazy. Okay, so there's a couple other questions. So someone asked, what's your take on the Austrian historian Tom Cooper? He posted some detailed allegations with certain figures in the Ukrainian military. Is he credible or peddling bull's manure? I'm not super familiar with him. I've read a couple of his articles. It seems like he kind of knows what he's talking about, but he has like a pretty clear angle. I don't know what what his angle specifically is, but the language he uses, like he calls President Zelenskyy Zell and says like, "Oh, Zell's living in a wonderland," and like all I don't know. It seems like he has a very specific perspective, and that maybe is being overly communicated and maybe getting in the way of like a non like an objective analysis. But I don't know. I mean, if you can just take what he's saying that is clearly fact and separate it from his opinions, it's probably fine. But yeah, I wouldn't. I definitely would say there are problems in the Ukrainian military. There's like issues with bad commanders and corruption. There's obviously been a lot of work to reform the Ukrainian military, but it's still, a relatively young country with a lot of other issues, and that's part of it. So yeah, I don't know. Like you can definitely take the facts about that and craft up a narrative if you want, but I think overall, it's pretty obvious just by like the nature of the facts on the ground that the Ukrainian military as an institution has clearly survived and adapted. So, we can focus on the corruption, but it doesn't seem like the whole picture, right? So, if you got like a strong angle like that, then I don't know if I can take you super seriously if you're ignoring like the obvious facts on the ground. Okay, and then does anyone else have any opinions on Tom Cooper?
I haven't interacted with him since the Syrian civil war, so I would not comment on the latest things.
I don't know him, so no idea.
Cool. And then someone mentioned Mark Galeotti, who's usually saying people who talk about Russia, collapsing or dumb, was saying that it looks like this can't be sustainable. Yeah, I mean, sometimes we even get we get brief glimmers of that. Do you have any opinions on Galeotti, Stanimir?
He's very nice to talk to in person. I've met him twice. I say I'd have a different view on how much the Russian economy is impacted, but I would say that he's more focused on elite dynamics, the security services, and if you want an opinion on the Russian mafia system, that's your guy. I don't think he's been as focused on, let's say, the economy, but he has covered it from time to time, like during the egg crisis and recently due to the shortages of fuel.
Oh, there you go. Much more nuanced take than mine. I think that's all the questions I see. Cool. So yeah, I think we'll go ahead and close it out here. I did want to mention, sorry we didn't acknowledge it earlier. Someone sent us a super chat. Thanks so much. We appreciate it. We will say if you want to donate money though, please do donate it to like a Ukrainian charity, someone that's helping Ukraine, like a registered, credible charity. I don't know, like Come Back Alive or stuff like that. Mr. Gao, you were running a raffle recently. You saw a lot of people donating to different ones. Do you have any that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I mean, is Andrew still funding?
Yeah, I wasn't 100% sure.
Yeah, me neither. But if you really want to invest money into the Tochnyi ecosystem, which I don't think you should doing, you can donate to my fundraiser. I'm setting one up currently for friends of mine who work at repair and restoration in Ukraine. But it's a future fundraiser, will be like online in maybe 1 or 2 weeks. So if you really want to invest a couple of euros or whatever, would be very, very grateful for that. Otherwise, there are a lot of open fundraisers for, I don't know, Liberty Ukraine, for example, which do really, really great work, with whom I think Andrew also partnered on his fundraiser. And I really don't feel like recommending anyone because I don't want to prioritize one fundraiser over another. Yeah, just fund whatever you are interested in.
Yeah, I just wanted to give people some like easy, like credible organizations. Come Back Alive and Liberty Ukraine are both great. I think that's. But yeah, once in a while, people send us super chats. I thought we turned them off, but apparently not. But yeah, we definitely appreciate your support. Don't want to, suggest otherwise. Thanks so much. If you do want to like help Tochny specifically, we just ask that you kind of spread the word about our research and our stream. It really like helps us out to get like word of mouth going in general, because generally like content related to war and violence, it gets kind of like artificially suppressed a bit by the the algorithm, which is sort of understandable. But yeah, it really helps us to get a little bit of like organic support that way. So yeah, we appreciate any like support you guys want to give us in that regard. And if you guys want to offer financial support, we recommend some Ukrainian charities like Liberty Ukraine, Come Back Alive, and there's lots of other ones. Just make sure that it's a credible, registered organization with whatever government in whatever country it's in, and that you definitely know they're doing good work. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of options. Cool. So I think we're going to go ahead and close it out there. Thanks so much, everybody, for your contributions. Chat, we really appreciate you guys asking lots of great questions and participating. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. We know not everyone can make it for the live stream, so we appreciate you guys watching the videos after the fact. If you want to leave any questions in the comments, we do read them. I try to remember to respond to them, but sometimes I don't. Yeah, so thanks, chat. Thanks, of course, to our panel. Thanks to Daniele for stopping by. Thanks, of course, as always, to Stanimir and Mr. Germany, to Ukraine, and myself and for participating. Yeah, we'll see everyone next. Actually, I don't know. I think we're probably going to take next week off. It's a bit of a European holiday time, and so we'll put something out, but I'm not sure we'll do live streams. So we'll see everyone next time. Slava Ukraini.
Heroam Slava.
On behalf of the brave.